He's the judge on the upcoming program Tribunal Justice on Amazon Freevee, and also the host of the podcast, The Tanya Acker Show. Okay, Judge, I'm so glad you're here because you know this business of warrants being executed, the timing of them, the sealing of them, the unsealing of them. Do you have any idea or any sort of thoughts as to why they would hold this sealed for the 60 days? Like, what benefit advantages it to the Pennsylvania folks to keep this under seal? They're not part of the gag order.
Well, I think that if you're prosecuting this case, Ashleigh, you want to control the narrative, you want to control the story, and that means to some extent controlling the dissemination of information. We're still in very early days when it comes to really setting out the narrative and telling the story of how these crimes happened, the blow by blow that the jury is eventually going to hear. So to the extent that one can limit the information that goes out into the public before the lawyer has the chance to kind of steer that information and put it into the context that they want, that's really part of the strategy, I think, and the theory behind, wanting to continue with the gag.
So I wanted to ask you sort of a small detail. I don't know if there's anything to be made of this or not, but in the list, and I'm going to ask the control room if they can throw that list up again of all the things that they seized that finally we discovered today when they unsealed the warrant. They listed, a flashlight and 4 medical gloves, and then all these things that looked like they were just things he was wearing: a white T-shirt, a black sweatshirt, a pair of socks, a pair of size 13 sneakers, black shorts, black boxers, and a buckle swab. Why? I'm trying to make some sense out of the flashlight and the 4 medical style gloves being lumped in with what looked like basically what was on Bryan's person.
I don't know why the warrant would be drafted in this way, but again, Ashleigh, it goes to the point that I just made. What the prosecution needs to do here is to tell the story. And so you tell a story about a defendant, a murderer, who has a flashlight. He kills folks with gloves. He's wearing all black. Remember, the roommate of one of the victims recalled that she'd seen someone in the early hours of the morning of the murders wearing all black. So connecting that black-clad murderer to this defendant is an important part of the prosecution's story. So it really is about buttoning up all these little details so that when you're standing in front of the jury, you can give them specific points, specific facts, little things that tie this defendant to the crime. And that's what they're trying to do here.
Let me ask you about the size 13 sneakers. I sort of like that. I seized on that right away. And I thought, look, I don't know a lot about men's shoes, but I asked my husband, you're about a size 10.5. Isn't that kind of normal? It turns out that size 10.5 is standard, sort of the most average shoe size across America. And then I asked one of our staff members to do some research. And in 2014, a study showed that size 12, 13 represent only 10% of shoe sales for men across the country. To me, that sounds like a really good piece of evidence because there is that latent shoe print found in blood in the victim's home. So put those pieces together for me and tell me why that might be super critical.
Well, again, look, you're standing in front of the jury if you're the prosecutor, and you're going to say, look at this bloody footprint in the home, which is also matches the defendant's shoe size, which is not, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, a very common shoe size in the United States. Again, it's about trying to connect the dots and giving the jury compelling bits of specific information that tie this defendant to the crime. That is one such specific piece of information.
Yeah, and it's like whenever people say, just a circumstantial case, I want to slug them because all cases that I cover are pretty much circumstantial. You rarely get a witness to, a murder. I mean, you get them, but not that often. So most cases that we deal with in American jurisprudence, it oftentimes is circumstantial, and it can be extraordinarily strong. Sometimes better than a eyewitness was Mr. Magoo. So in that respect, if you have so many of these pieces, it just becomes less and less reasonable to assume that it's not the guy. Maybe one or two, you could say that's unreasonable to leap to the conclusion, but like 10 or 15, it gets to the unreasonable. All right, last question real quickly, and that's about this gag order in Idaho. I've just been ranting away at the amount of secrecy in the Idaho courts. And I'm not just talking about the Idaho, the Moscow, Idaho murders. I'm talking about Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. They just seem to do this like it's Tuesday. I mean, it's just standard op. And I have been under the impression that that's not the way we operate, that it should be a last resort to put things under gag. Are you seeing that this is increasingly the way courts are operating everywhere? Is this Idaho unique? Like, what's your read?
I don't know, Ashleigh, that I have a specific read, but what I will say is that there is a lot of concern amongst decision makers, and not just decision makers, but legal players, about the effect of pretrial publicity, pretrial talking, social media posts. People, you've got to still go and get your jury, and you want a jury that has been as untainted as possible. Now, I hear the concern, and I think you raise a really good point that the public has an interest in knowing how our judicial system works and in knowing that, how the process is moving forward. But I do think that, and again, I don't have any specific comment on whether or not this is becoming more or less common, but I do think that many, many people now who are participants and players in the system are just worried about being able to control the narrative, because information gets out there so quickly and it can be spun so quickly by either side, or frankly, somebody who perhaps doesn't even have a direct interest in the case, that there is a concern about getting the reins on that.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.